The enigmatic world of vampires, history, myths, and pop culture. Welcome to a world filled with mystery and darkness. Who among you hasn't heard of vampires? These creatures, once legends, are now known and feared across the globe. They lurk in the shadows with extraordinary powers, yet carry the curse of immortality. But how did they come to be so well known? Where did they originate? And what makes them so captivating? In this video, we'll dive into the eerie history of vampires, from their origins to the fascinating facts that keep their legend alive. Brace yourself, because this story might be darker than you ever imagined. The vampire lore we know today didn't appear overnight. It has evolved from a mix of legends, myths, and stories from cultures worldwide, particularly in Eastern Europe and parts of Asia. But one of the most influential sources for the vampire myth comes from Transylvania, which is now part of modern-day Romania. In the 15th century, a ruler by the name of Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler, became infamous for his brutal reign. Vlad was known for his gruesome methods of torture, particularly impaling his enemies on long, sharp stakes, earning him the nickname the Impaler. Although there's no direct evidence that Vlad was a vampire, his violent nature and mysterious persona inspired many of the characteristics we associate with vampires today. However, it wasn't until the late 19th century that the modern concept of the vampire began to take shape, largely due to the publication of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, Dracula. Through the character of Count Dracula, Stoker introduced the world to a vampire that was both charming and terrifying, an immortal nobleman with an insatiable thirst for blood. Dracula wasn't just a horror novel. It was a work that combined history, mythology, and Eastern European culture, creating a figure of terror that has since become synonymous with the vampire archetype, an alluring yet monstrous being bound by an eternal curse. An alluring yet monstrous being bound by an eternal curse. Vampires have been a part of myth and folklore in many cultures. However, there are some fascinating details about vampires that many people might not know. Let's dive into some of these lesser-known facts. Fact 1. Vampires don't always transform into bats. While most people think of vampires turning into bats, this ability is a more modern addition to vampire lore. In many early Eastern European legends, vampires were said to transform into wolves or even mist, not bats. This shape-shifting ability was tied to their cunning and supernatural powers, not necessarily their connection to bats. Fact 2. Vampires must be invited into a home. One of the most enduring beliefs about vampires is that they can only enter a house if they are invited. This idea comes from old folklore, where vampires were seen as supernatural beings bound by certain rules or protections. The idea of being invited in relates to the protection people believed was granted by sacred spaces or spiritual rituals. Fact 3. Vampires cannot see their reflection. Another well-known myth is that vampires cannot see their reflection in mirrors. This stems from the belief that vampires, as soulless creatures, have no reflection. Mirrors were traditionally thought to reflect the soul, so a vampire's inability to see their image symbolizes their loss of humanity. Fact 4. A vampire's bite can turn someone into a vampire. One of the most iconic aspects of the vampire myth is the idea that a vampire's bite can transform a person into one of them. While this turning process has evolved in various stories, the bite represents both a curse and a gift of eternal life, but at the cost of one's humanity. This transformation symbolizes death and rebirth, a central theme in vampire folklore. As time went on, the image of the vampire began to evolve. No longer just terrifying creatures of the night, vampires became complex characters in a variety of stories, from classic horror films to modern books and TV shows. From the black and white Nosferatu to contemporary works like Twilight and The Vampire Diaries, vampires have been reimagined in many different ways. While early portrayals of vampires were purely monstrous, modern depictions often present them as charismatic, tragic, or even romantic figures. Characters like Edward Cullen from Twilight or Damon Salvatore from The Vampire Diaries are far removed from the traditional image of the bloodthirsty creature. Yet they still carry the same supernatural qualities, driven by an eternal curse and the constant struggle between their humanity and vampiric nature. Despite these softer portrayals, the core elements of the vampire myth, immortality, bloodlust, and the price of eternal life, remain. Vampires are still a symbol of both desire and danger, an alluring escape from the mortal realm, but one that comes at a heavy cost. But what is it about vampires that keep us so fascinated? Perhaps it's the tension between immortality and death. Vampires are cursed to live forever, but they also suffer from their endless existence. They are symbols of our fear of death, yet they also embody our desire for eternal life. Their tragic nature, their internal conflict, speaks to something deep inside of us. Vampires represent the ultimate unattainable, the desire for eternal life, for love without end, for power beyond measure. But they also remind us that everything comes with a price. Their stories continue to captivate us because they offer both fantasy and caution, an exploration of our darkest desires and our deepest fears. And that's a glimpse into the history of vampires and some of the fascinating facts that surround them. From the dark history of Vlad the Impaler to the modern-day tales of romantic and tragic vampires, their story continues to evolve, yet their essence remains the same: mysterious, dangerous, and alluring. Do you believe they exist, or are they just a legend that will never die? Leave a comment below, like the video, and don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating stories from the world of myths and legends. Until next time, fellow night travelers.